Hello, how are you? I'm Hector Perez from Dev School. Welcome to this new video, which is a graphical interface challenge for .NET MAUI. This time, we're going to replicate one of the screens from the design created by Rajon Barman. We're going to recreate the central screen. I like it a lot because it has a very attractive design. I really like the color combination. Creating this central section and selecting one of the coffee cup sizes is a challenge, I think. Before we continue, I'd like to point out that this interface challenge is due to the .NET MAUI UI July 2023 schedule, organized by Matt Goldman. If you want to learn more about .NET MAUI or visit other posts related to this schedule, you can go to the URL shown on the screen, where you can visit other posts that have emerged thanks to this initiative. With that said, let's get started. We'll begin this challenge, and for that, I have created a project in Visual Studio called Coffe App Demo, which we will use to create this project that we have seen in the dribble design. The first thing I did was to remove all the pre-created code. That is, I removed all the XAML code and the C# code from the code behind, and I also set this page called main page as the initial page. Once you've done this, the next step is to define the color palette we will use throughout the application. We'll do this by going to the folder called Resources. Here we have the Styles folder and finally a file called colors.xaml. We'll go to the bottom, and after the last color tag, I'm going to copy and paste a set of tags of the same color type that define a set of colors like dark gray, light gray, brown, orange, and BG gray, which will be used for the background. Once we've accomplished that, I'll navigate to the mainpage.xaml file, where we'll construct the graphical interface. Within the content page, we'll alter the background color using background color, specifying static resource BG gray, which is the color we defined earlier. We'll be previewing the modifications, and for this purpose, I launched the emulator installed on my computer. With this, we can observe a different color for the application's background. After changing the background color, the next step is to construct a grid style layout. We're going to set a margin equal to 15 units. I'm doing this because, referring back to the design in Dribble, you can observe that within the app's interior section, we have a border that distinguishes it from the exterior part. It's not very discernible here because I've already established some colors to better illustrate the distribution of each row in this grid. Essentially, these 15 units represent this space between the edge of the application and the central container. The following step is to identify the sections of the application, and for this occasion, I've chosen to create 4 rows for this grid we're constructing. The first row will extend from the top section to the beginning of the central section, a second row that extends from the start of this central part to exactly the middle, the third row that extends from the middle of this central container to the end of the central container, and a final row for the remaining content towards the bottom. We're doing this because I want to precisely identify the center of the application, so that I can distribute all the content upwards and downwards, and we can manipulate it in a more efficient way. There are other tutorials where this is achieved by only creating 3 rows and using a negative margin to push the content upwards. This time, I've chosen to do it this way, as I find it slightly easier to create this design. So, this is the structure we will use to create this grid. We're going to specify that we want a row definition equal to 0.4 star, 0.1 star, 0.1 star, and 0.4 star. These are the various rows that our application will have. The next step is to create a border. This border will serve as the container for the image that you see at the top. Going back to the XAML file, we're going to specify that we want a border, and we're going to indicate that we want a row span equal to 2, because as you can see, this image actually ends in the middle of the content of this central layout. Therefore, we specify that we want this border to span 2 rows. We close the tag. Inside, we specify border.stroke_shape to indicate that we want a round rectangle since the image has a border that contains it. This round rectangle will help us define that border and include the image as content. We're going to assign a corner radius equal to 20, 20, 20, 20. We close the tag. As part of the content of this border, we're going to create a new grid. We're going to define a set of rows equal to 0.3 star and 0.7 star. We're doing this because the container itself needs space for these icons, both the heart and the back arrow. So, the row we're defining will use 30% of the space for these icons, and the remaining 70% of the space will be left open and content-free. This is within the grid. We will then place the image we need. For that, we need to stop the application, because we need to import the image of the coffee cup from the images folder, which is what I'm going to do next. I've imported the image, which is named cup.jpg. After importing this image, I'm going to create a new image tag, which I will specify to span 2 rows. This is because I want the image to start from the top and end at the limit of the container. I will also change the aspect property to aspect fill, and similarly change the source property to assign the image named cup.jpg. Once this is done, I'm going to restart the application to see how it appears in the emulator. Perfect! After a few seconds, we can see the image at the top, filling all the corresponding space. It looks great! The next step is to create this pair of icons that we see at the top, for which we need to import a font file that I have previously prepared from the Fontello site. That's what I'm going to do next. Done! It's this file named fontello.ttf, which we're going to register so we can use a more descriptive alias. We're going to the MAUI program.cs file, where we have these 2 lines that define the fonts we're currently using. I'm going to duplicate one of the lines and change the font name to fontello.ttf, which is the name of the font. As an alias, I'm going to name it icons, with a capital I. I save all the changes, close the file, and I'm going to restart the application to see the changes as we make them. We have here again the design we previously created. Let's go back to the XAML file, and after this image tag, I'm going to create a new grid. I will indicate that I want a pair of columns which will each have the same space. This is because you can see in the design that we have this pair of icons, so we can create a division of columns and place the first icon at the beginning of the column and the second icon at the end of this column within this grid that we have previously defined. I'm going to proceed to create a new border through border with a margin equal to 15, 35, 0, 0, and also a background color equal to static resource. Let's use the dark gray color that we previously defined. A height request equal to 50 units, its horizontal options equal to start, and in the same way its vertical options equal to start. Let's also modify the width request so that it has a value of 50 units. With this, if we save the changes and go back to the emulator, we can already see at the top this square that is indicating to us that we can place content, but we don't actually want a square, we want a square with rounded edges. For this, we're going to indicate that we want a border dot stroke shape inside a round rectangle with its corner radius equal to 10, 10, 10, 10. We close this tag. With this, we have already modified how this container for the icon looks. Next, we're going to add the icon itself. We'll accomplish this through a label, setting its font family to icons, which is the font we imported earlier. A font size of 25 units. Also, setting its horizontal options to center. A text that equals to ampersand symbol, hash symbol, uppercase X, 801, and semicolon. and also a text color equal to static resource equal to light gray to create a contrast between the background and the icon color. Lastly, its vertical option set to center. We close this tag, save the changes, and you can see that at the top we have this icon with the properties we previously assigned. To avoid rewriting all the code, I'm going to duplicate the entire border tag. I'm going to paste it. We're going to make a few adjustments, like we're going to move this border to column number 1. With this, we can see this icon that has been duplicated. Let's modify some other properties, such as, for example, the left margin being set to 0, as we don't want this icon to be on the far left, but we want it to be displayed at the end of this column. We'll keep the second value of this margin the same, and modify the third value so that it equals 15. The last value remains at 0. We're also going to adjust its horizontal options so that instead of start, it's set to end. If we preview the changes, we can already see this icon on the right. We're also going to alter the text to display the icon that we need, which is the E800 icon. With this modification we've made, we now have the pair of icons at the top that closely resemble the design on Dribble we saw earlier. Once we've done this, we'll proceed with the creation of the central part of the application. To do this, we'll navigate to the section. Before completing the content page, we have a grid. We're going to write the code prior to this closing tag of this grid. What are we going to do? First, we'll create a border to be able to create this rounded section that we can see on the screen. Let's then specify border. We're going to specify that we want the border in row number 1. We want it to have a row span equal to 2, a stroke equal to static resource dark gray. We close the tag, and to achieve this rounded border, we're going to specify border.stroke_shape. We're going to create a round rectangle, corner radius equal to 30, 30, 30, 30. We close this tag. We're going to save the changes. We can already see this section in the center that is replicating the design on Dribble. To replicate the design we have on Dribble, we're going to create a grid to be able to divide the content into sections and be able to place each of the pieces in their appropriate place. So, as part of the content of this border, I'm going to create a new grid with a padding equal to 20, a background color equal to static resource equal to dark gray, a column definitions equal to 0.5 star, 0.25 star, 0.25 star. A row definitions equal to star, star, star. Why am I creating this set of rows? Well, I'm considering that we're going to have 3 rows for each of the text sections that we can see on the screen. I'm also considering 3 columns. The first column to define this part of the text, a second column to dictate where and when this button, which we can see on the screen, will start, and a third column to pinpoint where this currency value, which we can also see on the screen, will start. Therefore, this is the definition of the columns and rows within this grid. Next, we will halt the application. This is because I want to import the fonts that we will be using for the project. I will then proceed to import the pair of fonts. Well, I have now imported the fonts, which are this pair, Rubik Light and Rubik Regular. These fonts are free, so you can find them by doing a simple search on the internet. Once we have done this, we return to MAUI-program.cs. We're going to duplicate some of the lines of the fonts a couple of times. This is because we want to create a reference, an alias for each font. This will be done through Rubik Regular, which is the name of the first font, and we will set Rubik Regular as the alias. We will also assign Rubik Light for the second font and set Rubik Light as the alias. Once we have done this, we will restart the application to see the changes as we implement them. After we have started the application, we will inspect the grid that we previously created. Within it, let's start by writing a label element. We will specify that we want it to span 2 columns. Its font attributes will be set to bold to intensify the font color. We will also set the font family to Rubik Regular, which is the font we imported earlier, with a font size of 20 units and a text that reads Espresso Cappuccino. Finally, a text color set to white. We close this tag, save the changes, and now we can view this tag, which appears quite good. Let's create a second label control. This time, we're going to specify that it will be located in column number 2, font attributes again bold, font family set to Rubik Regular again, font size set to 20 units, horizontal text alignment set to center. We're also going to assign a text that is set to $50 and a text color set to static resource set to brown. We save the changes. We need to close this tag, save the changes, and now we can view this second label. We're going to create a third label with a grid.row set to 1, grid.columnspan set to 2, font family set to Rubik Light. This time, font size set to 15 units. We're also going to specify a text that is set to the calf pike and a text color set to white. I'm going to close this tag again. We view the changes, and now we have this text that we see here on the screen. Next, we're going to create this last line that you can see on the screen. For this, we will use a horizontal stack layout to nest these 3 visual elements, and we're going to place the button in the corresponding section of the grid. Then, we return to the XAML file, and after the last label, we're going to create a horizontal stack layout. We'll position it in row number 2, and we're going to indicate a space of 10 units to allow some space between each of these elements. I'm going to close this tag, and within it, I'll create a control label with a font family set to icons, a font size of 20 units, horizontal option set to center, and a text set to the ampersand symbol, hashtag symbol, XE802, which is the symbol for the star icon. We will also use a text color set to static resource set to orange, and vertical option set to center. I'm going to close this tag, view the changes, and now we have this star icon that you can see on the screen. We're going to create the following text parts through a control label, font attributes set to bold, font family set to Rubik Regular, font size set to 15 units, and a text set to 4.5. Text color set to white and vertical option set to center. Let's save the changes, and we now have this text that looks quite good. We could be creating all of this in a resource dictionary, but so you can see specifically the properties that affect each of the controls, I'm doing it this way. We will create a final label control with a font family set to Rubik Regular, a font size of 15 units, and a text set to 4.4461. I close the parentheses, a text color set to static resource, light gray, and its vertical options set to center. If I close this element, we now have the specified text here. Finally, after this horizontal stack layout, we're going to create a button that is located in row number 2, in column number 1, and that has a column span set to 2, a background color set to static resource, brown. Also a font family set to Rubik Regular, and a text set to add to cart. We close this tag. With this, we have completed creating the central part, adding this button which looks quite good. Let's proceed with completing the application. That is, we're going to create this final section that you can see in purple. For this, we're going to create a new grid. We're going to do this before this closing of the final grid or the grid containing all the content. Here, we're going to create a new grid. We're going to position the grid in row number 3. We're going to create a set of row definitions. The first one is 0.4 star, the second 0.4 star, and the third 0.2 star. This is to divide the section of the first text section, this second section of the coffee cup size selection, and a final space for this button to make the purchase. Within this grid, we're going to create a vertical stack layout with a margin set to 0, 20, 0, 0, and a spacing between the elements of 20 units. Inside the vertical stack layout, I'm going to create a label element with a font family set to Rubik Regular. This is for the text of the description. I'm also going to indicate that I want a font size set to 16 units, a text set to description, a text color set to D9DADA. I close this tag. If I save the changes, in the emulator we can already see this description tag. Next, we're going to create the second section of the text, which is the description itself. For this, we create another label control with a font size set to 14 units, a line height set to 1.3 to have this separation between each of the lines. I close this element, and the point here is that I want to define a series of texts. You can observe that the text description is truncated, and we see a second text section in a different color. To achieve this effect, I'm going to divide the control label into multiple lines using formatted strings. Then, within the control label, I specify that I want to access the label.formatedText property. Following this, I create a formatted string and a span with a font family set to Rubik Light with a text that matches the portion of the text I've previously created, so you don't have to watch me write all this text. After the text, I will specify that I want a text color that matches the static resource light gray. I close this definition, save the changes, we have these properties applied. We go back to the emulator, and you can see that we now have the description as it is, as part of the application. It's necessary to specify this second section of the text in a different color. To do this, I'm going to create another span section within the formatted string, which will also have a font family set to Rubik Light, a text that reads "Read More", and a text color set to static resource brown, which is the color we've previously defined. We save the changes, and now we have this lovely text section that closely resembles the design on Dribble, which is this section here. Okay, now that we've completed this description section, let's move on to the part where we select the size of the coffee cup. We will perform this after the closing tag of the vertical stack layout. Here, I specify that I want a new vertical stack layout. I'm going to assign some properties to the vertical stack layout. For example, I want to place it in row number 1. I want a margin equal to 0, 20, 0, 0. Also, a spacing of 10 units. And within the vertical stack layout, I'm going to create a label control for the size part. So, I indicate that I want a text equal to size. I want a text color equal to white. I close the tag, save the changes, and we already have this size part for selecting the coffee cup. Next comes a somewhat complicated part, and it is this section to select the coffee size. Fortunately, I found a site or a publication on the internet by David Ortinau, this publication that you can see on the screen, which shows how to create a control called segmented control in .NET MAUI. And even though he creates a design, which you can see on the screen for a demonstrative application, we're going to adapt the same code so that this essentially reflects the design on Dribble. We're going to adapt this code that you can see on the screen to create the Dribble design. So, thanks David Ortinau for this publication that has helped me to create the design in .NET MAUI. So, let's start with the creation of the segmented control. We're going to do this within the vertical stack layout tag, after the label control that we created earlier. Here, we're going to create a layout of the horizontal stack layout type. we're going to indicate a property called radio button group equal to group name equal to menu categories. This is because we're going to have within this control or within this stack layout really a set of radio button controls. So, for us to be able to select one at a time, we need to assign this property. Next, we'll specify a space of 10 units and set vertical options to center. To assign each of the values, small, medium, or large, we'll access the property called item source and define it through xArray of the xtype xstring. We're doing this to define a set of strings through xstring. Within the tags, we define each of the values. I'll duplicate this line to assign the additional values I need, namely medium and large. This will allow us to preview this data to be able to work with them. This would be useful to add more elements if we needed them. Next, we'll define the appearance of each of the elements that are part of the horizontal stack layout because currently we don't have any element added yet as part of the graphical interface, as we haven't indicated how they're going to look in the application. So we need to access a property called bindableLayout.itemTemplate. Inside, we'll create a data template where we'll indicate that each of the elements specified as part of the item source will be a radio button. We'll indicate that the content will be equal to a binding to the current element through binding and a dot. We close this tag, save the changes, and now you can see a set of radio button controls on the graphical interface, which represent each of the item source values. This design isn't what we're interested in. We want to customize this design more. We can achieve this through a property called control template from the radio button control. So I'll indicate that for each radio button, we want to assign the control template property to redesign the control. We'll access the control template to specify the radio button's appearance. We're going to create a grid. Within the grid, we'll specify that we want a border. We need to assign a name. Let's call it, for example, container. Let's specify that the stroke will be equal to the static resource bg_gray, because when each element is selected, the background color will match the application's background color. But we'll modify this a bit more later. Let's specify a width request equal to 100 units. We close this element. To give it a rounded format, we'll use a stroke shape again. That is, we access the border. We have to do this within the border control. Here, we access the border.stroke shape. Inside, we'll create a round rectangle with a corner radius of 10, 10, 10, 10. We close this tag. And as part of the border content, we'll specify that we'll display the text as part of the item source through a label, to which we'll assign a name equal to text label, with its horizontal options equal to center, a text equal to template binding, which is the content. What this will allow us to do is to access the text that is currently part of the radio button. We will also adjust its vertical options to a center value. Let's save the changes. If we go back to the emulator, in this instance, I had to rerun it for the changes to be visible in the emulator, and with this, you can see that we have this format for each of the radio buttons. At present, this is not the behavior we desire. We want to display a different design for a selected element and another design for an unselected element. To create this effect, we will utilize a Visual State Manager. To achieve this, we will proceed to the border closure. Here, we will access the Visual State Manager Visual State Groups property. Inside, we will access the Visual State Group list. Here, Visual State Group, which we will assign a name equal to checked states. Within this Visual State Group, we will define a visual state, which we will name checked. This is so that we can identify when one of the elements of this group of radio buttons is selected. Next, we will access the property called setters, which will allow us to assign a value to each of the properties we need when an element is selected. The first setter we will define will have a target name equal to text label, as this is the control we want to modify, that is, the text label. Here, we will specify that we want the label.textColor property with a value equal to static resource brown, which is one of the colors we have previously defined. I will copy this setter, paste it, and alter the target name, as we wish to reference a different control. This time, we will change the properties of the layout named container, which is in fact this border. We will adjust some of its properties. When the element is selected, we will change the property named background color and assign the color static resource BG gray. I will duplicate this line once more. This is because I want to change another property of this border. This time the property I want to change is the stroke with a value equal to brown. Here I added an extra R. Okay, with this I will save the changes. I will go back to the emulator, and I want you to see what happens when I select one of the elements. Observe that this time, when I selected each of the elements, their design changed as I was selecting them. This time, the properties specified earlier in the XAML code were applied. That is, a brown color and a background color equal to the app's background color, which is this darker gray, and the properties have remained selected because I have not specified a different state for when a control is deselected. That's what we need to do next. To accomplish this, I will duplicate this visual state. I will change the X name so that instead of checked, it's unchecked. I will also change some of the states. The properties will be exactly the same. Only the colors will change. For example, for the text color of the label, I will specify that I want a light gray color. For the border's background color, I want to use dark gray, and the stroke will also be dark gray. I will save the changes, return to the emulator, and observe how the color automatically changes to a disabled state as soon as one of the elements is deselected. This is how we've accomplished this attractive selection effect for each of the elements. The final step is to create this button at the bottom. This is the simplest part. We need to go to the end of the vertical stack layout before these closing grid tags. Inside, I will specify that I want a button with a grid.row equal to 2, a background color equal to a static resource of brown, a font family of Rubik regular, and text that says buy now. I will close this tag, save the changes, and we now have this button at the end of the application. With this, we have completed the graphical interface challenge from the original Dribble file. The design turned out quite similar, and I am pleased with the final result. If you also liked the design result in .NET MAUI, I invite you to leave a comment. Also, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and activate the notification bell so you'll be informed as soon as I post new content related to the world of .NET and general development. See you in the next video.